Hello, my friends. My name is Kelly Taylor Osborne, and I am incredibly excited and humbled today to come to you to talk about an issue that I feel like personally, through all of my studying and all of my hours, dedicating myself to the environmental issues and the climate crisis around us, that oftentimes goes overlooked. And that is, of course, the issue of overfishing. One of, after thoroughly deep diving into the subject and researching it, is not only one of the most important and pertinent environmental crises, but also the most detrimental oceanic crisis, and how it affects not just all of us human beings and creatures who live and reside on land, but also the billions of creatures that call the oceans and waterways on our planet their home. So today we'll be talking about a myriad of things, but in particular, we are going to be talking about what in particular overfishing is, how it's impacting our world, what in particular caused this issue, how it impacts us, and finally, what we can do to help fight against it. So first and foremost, we have to know what is overfishing. And while there's a lot of ways that we can define overfishing, a basic understanding is that overfishing is the dangerous and damaging practice of depleting a local aquatic ecosystem of its population at a faster rate than the time it takes to replenish said lost population. So this is done in a myriad of ways, but oftentimes a lot of the most damaging ways include bottom trawling, which is basically when these fishing vessels take on the surface of the ocean and then they take a net and push it all the way down to the bottom of the ocean floor and just drag this net across the ocean floor. And it picks up a lot of bottom feeders, it picks up everything in between, and it just completely decimates the environment that stands between it. And it's just pulled along the way until the net is full, and they lift it back up and they load it all in, do it again. And while this a lot of times is done because of the fast rate that these fisheries can catch these creatures, a lot of the times it leaves the ecosystems that they do this in completely destroyed and uninhabitable for years, if ever. And so what you see is a lot of these fisheries that take part in bottom trawling, that they have to bounce from place to place, and this just spreads and it completely decimates ecosystems in countries and communities, and it affects a lot of the stuff you see on land as well. And then another way that you see a lot of fisheries overfishing is through pair trawling, which basically takes two of these fishing vessels and attaches a net to both of them and they pull through. And a lot of the times that's when you see a lot more examples of bycatch, which is basically when these fishing vessels catch like sharks, whales, dolphins, these protected creatures that are illegal through many maritime laws, and are often wounded severely, traumatized by these careless and thoughtless acts of just catching these creatures that they basically treat like objects, and many times killing these incredibly important creatures as well. So, as you can see from this quote from World Wildlife Fund, overfishing puts more than 1/3 of all sharks, rays, and chimeras, all creatures that are protected by laws, at risk of extinction. So, how is overfishing impacting our world? So, a lot of the ways, as we briefly discussed with our discussion of bottom trawling, as you can see here with the picture of the coral, a lot of the times it completely decimates the local ecosystems within the ocean. So, because of the large disruption and depletion of vital organisms within the affected ecosystems, overfished areas lose countless marine life, which are essential for the ecosystem's upkeep, as well as important environmental factors such as corals. And something that I think a lot of people oftentimes fail to remember is that coral are the biggest worldwide absorbers of carbon. Like, yes, these lush jungles, they absorb so much, but these corals contribute endless amounts of absorption rates that without these coral reefs, um, really, really affect and make those carbon emissions linger in our air so much and really damage the earth. According to a number of studies, fish populations from around the world, including in ocean hotspots, which oftentimes harbor these like gorgeous examples of not just like current oceanic species, but also just a beautiful display of the history of the creatures that reside in the ocean and their ecosystems and environments. You're seeing a huge decrease that is drastic within the time that global overfishing rates have increased and the industrialization of fisheries and the fishing process have really taken hold. So as you can see here in my map that shows which areas are most affected, and you can see these in these white circles that I've basically highlighted on this map. These portray the world's major danger zones, and these are the areas which have been the most affected by overfishing. And something that I found the most intriguing when researching these danger zones is, as you can see, a lot of these zones reside in the global south, and something where, like, personally for me in my undergrad, which was in communication, my major focus of study was in global environmental communication. And a huge issue in environmental communication is the lack of hearing about issues within the global south. And something that I was trying to figure out is, why isn't this being talked about? And the concerning issues, the fact that like the examples are here, the facts are here, but the fact that the most affected areas reside in the global south is incredibly humbling and depressing, because these issues are incredibly important and it affects so much more than these danger zones. It affects every single inch of our planet. And yet, these major zones that desperately need attention to be brought upon this issue aren't getting the attention that it needs and deserves, and is being left to their own devices in many, many cases. And it's terrifying, frankly, to look at. So, what in particular has caused this issue? We've discussed how these, like, basically careless acts of just kind of pushing through and just getting these creatures at the fastest rate possible, um, just to compete with supply and demand, causes a lot of this to happen. But there are several other contributors as well, including subsidies, which are financial support given to the fishing industry, which has led to an unsustainable amount of fishing vessels in the ocean because of that large increase of supplies that they have on hand, which, due to demand, catch an alarmingly high rate and often overfish up to 2 to 4 times the recommended rate. A quote from Earth Eclipse shows that today, fishing fleets across the globe are estimated to be up to 250% of the actual capacity need to catch what the world needs. So oftentimes, you go into these local seafood restaurants and you see fish tanks these fish tanks, like, oftentimes, I think infamously, filled with like lobsters that are just stacked on top of each other. And it's like, I, at least personally, I would go in there and be like, why do you even need that much? There's not even that many people asking for these creatures. Why are you pushing them in here? They're clearly miserable, and you're just going to pick them up and just kill them. And it's because oftentimes we have an overabundance of fished up creatures that are being sold and put up for food. And it's not at all what the world needs. It's not helping, particularly any community, and in many cases, damaging these communities that are both fishing and also observing their local ecosystems. Another one is through policies and regulations. So a lot of the times, because of, as we've discussed, there's a lot of like almost ignorance to this issue. There's a lack of management regulations as well as minimal policies and laws by countries contributing to overfishing, which, by the way, are most countries. Even though, yes, as you could see earlier, there are several danger zones, there's countless examples of almost every single country on the planet taking part in overfishing to some extent. There are also rampant illegal activities, including unreported catching of critical species and forced labor, where workers are paid minimally, if at all. So illegal fishing contributes to around 20 to 50% of caught fish around the world. And in overfishing, and this is, if anything, I want to be taken away from this presentation, it is this. Overfishing is not just an environmental crisis, it is also a critical humanitarian crisis, and something that is often overlooked and ignored, and countless people are being abused by these systems and these lack of policies and regulations and being forced to participate in these incredibly unsustainable practices. A lack of awareness of marine species and their disposability view within public perception has led to a general disregard of marine life and its preservation. And because of that, it's also led to a large disregard to the ways that these creatures are caught as well. And while, yes, there are so many amazing activist groups that are focusing on incredibly important issues with the ocean, such as the trash that collects in the ocean and stuff like that, many times those often overshadow and outweigh the activist groups that are trying to fight against issues such as this, that not just affect the ocean and its creatures, but also affecting humans, and a lot of the times the abuse of individuals, and oftentimes, as we will be discussing, abuse and killing of these individuals because of horribly disregarded care and policies for these individuals and for fishing in general. So, on that lovely note, how is this affecting us, starting at an individual impact? So hundreds of individuals are enslaved within the fishing industry and are severely and horrifically brutalized and killed in the oceans. A common theme within individuals, as seen by a number of studies who have escaped slavery within the fishing industry, show incredible signs of post-traumatic stress because of the horrific examples and images that they have been subjected to while being forced to fish on the oceans. And because of a lot of the times they're in international waters, not only are these specific countries and their maritime laws just being ignored, but also they don't even have to even abide by many of them because they're on international waters. And while there are abolitionist groups that are helping several enslaved individuals escape their situation, threats and lack of awareness has prevented large-scale help. So, from a community impact, a lot of rampant overfishing in a lot of areas which rely on fish as a source of protein and food. There's a lot of shortages of food and resources provided by the local aquatic ecosystem and are commonly seen with that. The lack of regulation causes local communities' ecosystems to suffer and lose oftentimes millions of dollars. And fisheries that avoid illegal practices lose revenue because there are so many others that are abusing that lack of policy and regulation that is seen in that industry. And they oftentimes close because they just cannot compete with those numbers and those prices, and cause many of those that are fishing at a sustainable rate to lose their jobs and have to close, and their workers to lose their livelihoods. So on a global impact, with the global trade of fish, depletion of these vital fish to this trade will cause global scale economic turmoil throughout the entire world. Oftentimes, despite preservation efforts for numerous endangered creatures around the world, many species have been lost because of unregulated illegal fishing. And finally, because of environmental degradation of the ocean, its assistance in the world's climate has been greatly limited, as we talked about earlier, with coral's assistance in gathering and absorbing carbon. It causes a large scale noticeable difference within the global climate and really affects how the rest of the world is being affected. It highly creates turmoil throughout the rest of the planet. And finally, what can we do about this? And unfortunately, my friends, there is really no easy answer to this because personally, as someone who has been vegetarian for years and recently went vegan in the last year, um, a lot of the times you see many people that say, well, you could go vegan, you could completely cut out fishing, like eating fish, stuff like that. Unfortunately, that's not enough. As you can see from a quote from Greenpeace, a campaign that focuses only on veganism ignores the billions of people that depend on the oceans for survival. This is a livelihood for many, many people. In uprooting that and forcing these people out of these jobs, if they are fishing at a sustainable level, is completely destroying their livelihoods and uprooting them as individuals. Not to mention, many times, vegan and vegetarian diets are completely inaccessible for a variety of people who otherwise don't have the resources, don't have the money to support and provide for that change in their diet. And many times it's also, you have to know if you're in a healthy standpoint to even have that diet. It can oftentimes lead to a lot of people having a number of health issues. So while I could sit here and say that, like, well, you could just go vegan, if every single person watching this video went vegan, the fishing industry and overfishing would not be touched. It would not be affected. And that's just the unfortunate reality of the situation. While yes, you can avoid it, and while yes, if every single person on the planet went vegan, overfishing wouldn't be an issue because why would it? You know, it's not like we would need fish anymore. It's not the answer. What you should do, anyways, you can become involved in a more political and policy focused manner. So there are numerous groups that are fighting and petitioning against overfishing and the dangerous subsidies that fund them. And there are a lot of activities that individuals can get involved with that help fight against this issue. So that includes stuff like signing petitions, you know, going to local protests, stuff like that. Another thing that you can do is just discuss the issue and spread public awareness of it. And it will show people that people truly care about this issue that is oftentimes, as we've discussed, overlooked on the grand scheme of things with the environmental crisis, and are looking for governments to hold these companies accountable and holding these industries to the standard that we're holding a lot of land-based companies accountable as well. And support organizations that are fighting against overfishing and conserving vital species such as endemic fish and endangered species. So I want to make a very specific notice that this is saying, like, show organizations that say specifically they're fighting against overfishing, because as we discussed earlier, there's a lot of activist groups that are fighting against all of, like, a bunch of issues that are incredibly important with the oceans, such as cleaning up the trash and stuff like this. But you have to read more into it, my friends. You have to see what they're doing to fight against this overfishing crisis. Because at this stage and at this age, if they're in a community that is very openly taking part of the overfishing, and they're not doing anything to fight against it, that's letting these companies and these industries continue on with these negative practices. And so supporting these companies that can do a lot to get this like other issues with the ocean taken care of, if they acknowledge this overfishing crisis, it can help a lot in getting the community involved and the community aware. So in conclusion, Overfishing is an incredibly prevalent killer that plagues our oceans and prevents preservation of both our environment and our humanity. In fighting against overfishing, you fight for the planet, its animals, and the millions of individuals exploited by its incredibly negative practices and systems. I hope today's discussion has really opened your eyes on this incredibly important issue that I know having researched this, I'm ashamed of how little I knew about this issue and this incredibly pertinent crisis that affects our entire planet. And if anything, if you take away that like this is helping our land and are helping our people, if you want to focus more on how it affects us from an anthropocentric point of view, then so be it. You know, there are thousands of people who are enslaved by this crisis. There are thousands of people being hurt and killed and abandoned by this crisis. And getting to spread awareness about this is an incredible honor. And I thank you all so much for listening to me today. If you have any questions or need any help, I know I couldn't be here with you today face to face, but I'd be very, very happy. I've shared both my LinkedIn and my email with the organizers of this amazing event. And thank you all so much. And take care. Bye.